Hello, and a very warm welcome to my co-host for this episode, Piers Byrne. Piers is the founder of Collingwood Advisory. How are you doing today, Piers?
Fantastic, thank you. I join you from Greece, and it's not on fire.
And that's the end of the podcast. And a special warm welcome to today's guest, Terry O'Dwyer. And Terry is the co-founder of LSX. Good morning to you, Terry.
Morning. Glad to be here.
Thank you for giving up your time. So we're going to get into it. We've got lots of questions for you, Terry. We're going to pepper you today with a number of questions around the business. Before we do that, for those that aren't aware, if you can just bring LSX to life for anyone that maybe hasn't heard of it, what it does, who it is, who it serves, please.
Sure. Well, LSX stands for Life Science Executives, and we're a global B2B complex or international partnering platform, I would say. What we do is help connect C-suite biotech executives with investors and with pharma business development executives through a series of conferences and events that we hold in the UK, Europe, and Boston. We also have a series of events that focuses on RNA therapeutics. Again, in that world, we connect a lot of the C-suite in the RNA therapeutic space with those that are providing solutions to help enable the development of those drugs and also to provide the capital sources that they need to be able to grow and develop their businesses.
Thank you. And people might have read, this is going to go out probably 2 or 3 months after, but the business was recently sold to Informa and is now part of the Informa Connect division. I want to take you back. We're going to talk about a number of different facets, but I want to take you back to start off with. The business launched in 2014. In reflecting on your journey, always useful to know what the core motivations were behind starting the business. And I guess a follow-up, why did you feel that specific moment in time was the right one to launch?
I mean, it's a good question. I think I've kind of got entrepreneurial DNA. I think most of us who end up starting companies have something within us that we've carried since childhood, I suppose. So some of it is kind of in the DNA. I think, in 2014, I had at that point already spent about 7 or 8 years in an established B2B conference organization called Terrapin. I kind of risen the ranks there and reached a pretty senior level. And I kind of got to a point where I realized that, I wasn't kind of learning or growing anymore in the role that I was in. And I also kind of fancied my chances in being able to create something of significant value myself rather than for Terrapin. Yeah, I think, the decision to launch in 2014 was kind of, I guess anticipated by those circumstances. I think I took some pretty careful steps, I think, before actually launching the business. I think there's this kind of idea that entrepreneurs take massive risks. And I kind of took a leaf out of Richard Branson's book where, you actually, he had this very famous story where he leased the Boeing jets before he went off and started his business, but he included a clause where he could sell them back if it didn't work. So he very much de-risked his launch. And I did the same thing. I kind of made sure I had a runway. I made sure that everything was, de-risked as much as it possibly could. And I knew that, I'd give myself a year, and if it didn't work, I would always be kind of able to get back into the marketplace. And so it just felt like the right time.
Yeah, so interesting, because I was going to ask you how prepared you were for your journey into entrepreneurship. And you mentioned before that there was maybe something in your DNA. Obviously, I guess there's 2 ways you can, come out of school, college, university, and throw yourself straight into it. Do you think the decision to start working first, and as you said, you were at Terrapin for 7 years, I think beforehand, 6 years as a general manager, but you was sort of premeditated? You thought, right, I'm going to sort of learn a bit about business, learn about the industry, and then set up? Or do you think that decision to launch, even though it was sort of in your DNA, came about when you were sort of within the industry and already experienced
I
a
think
bit?
probably the latter rather than the former. I do think that there
Yeah.
was always kind of, an idea at the back of my head that one day I would launch my own business. I guess I had no idea when and how that would be. And I think that only became clear really after working in Terrapin and kind of developing and honing a craft and developing kind of an expertise on my own. And also, I think just, the nature of what we do in conferences and events means that it is quite easy, I think, to launch your own business. We all know kind of really you only need a little bit of forward sales to be able to kind of get going. So if you have a really good idea and you can convince a sponsor to stump up 20, 30K, you can be off to the races in starting something. So yeah, I think, the idea was always there, but really only kind of came to fruition as I worked my way through Terrapin and then, yeah.
Sure. Obviously, you co-founded the business with Neil Darks. How important was it for you and maybe for Neil that you actually decided to launch this together rather than as a solo venture? Because that obviously comes with its own challenges, both pros and potentially disadvantages. So give us a flavour of that decision, how you sort of both came to the realisation that it was the right time for both of you.
I think, the decision to go with Neil is probably the single most important decision that we made. I think certainly for me, for my own sort of personality, I needed a foil. I needed someone to bounce ideas off. And I do think, I do say when people ask me, what's the number one thing you recommend when you start a business, I always say, do it with a partner, because I just find it's so valuable to have that co-pilot with you on the journey so that you can actually share the really difficult moments that you experience together, and you can bounce off each other in a way that only a founder can speak to another founder. So I do think, absolutely critical and vital that we did do that. And I would say it's certainly one of the key ingredients to our success as a business. I would say that you're right, it can go pear-shaped when you start with a co-founder. And on that front, I think, Neil and I were professional colleagues before we launched together. We weren't really, I guess, deep friends, and that developed as the journey went on. But we had a mutual respect and we had an understanding of how we worked together. And I think the chemistry was good. I think we got lucky, to be honest. Like, I think, the personal dynamics between me and Neil just happened to work. And very often in kind of a founder's journey, that isn't the case. Sometimes the personalities just clash. But for Neil and I, we were just quite fortunate that our personalities were complementary as well as our skill sets were complementary. So yeah, absolutely vital to the success of the business.
And great segue, actually, because your part of Terry's story finishes where I met Terry and Neil. I think in a pub in Farringdon, Terry, you think you're starting the business, you've got your runway together. My questions are really around what's changed and what hasn't since you started. Because I remember when we first met, you had a strong idea for a conference company in the life sciences space. But over time, you've taken decisions that have evolved it into something else, partnering, larger scale events, internationalization. What do you see as the big turning points for you and Neil in that journey? And related question was, how hard was it for you to change from the processes that you knew about doing conferences the Terrapin way to creating the LSX way of doing business?
Yeah, it has changed an awful lot since since that time we met you in the pub in Farringdon, right? I think, when we met you first and we had the beginnings of the business plan, it did kind of follow the cookie cutter mold of Terrapin, with some key differences. I think, when we started, we really wanted to do something quite different, and we wanted to take a sort of a more narrow and deep approach rather than a scattergun loads of conferences type of thing. We had a very strong idea that we wanted to be part of the community rather than a provider to the community. So we wanted to kind of get deep and embedded in the community. We wanted to lead with content. We wanted to kind of be a source of knowledge and a part of the community. And really, I think, what changed was, as we went down this journey of, getting ensconced and embedded in the community, we started to build relationships and really develop a far deeper level of understanding of our customer base than I ever did while I was at Terrapin, where, you really kind of given, an 8 or 10 week cycle to kind of get to know someone and put together a conference agenda. And, we, I guess through that process of kind of leading with content, getting ensconced in the community, launching with, meetups and focusing on the kind of the life science and capital piece, we really sort of came to understand that there were different ways of doing conferences and events. And I think particularly for us, we learned, I think certainly after our kind of first event, that, the partnering dimension to what we were doing in life sciences was absolutely vital. And, if we were going to be successful, we really needed to figure out how we were going to connect the life science execs with investors and with BD, and do so in a better way than the market was already doing. And so, that led us kind of on a journey. There are a number of, I guess, stop points on that journey where we learned and changed. I think probably, the most significant one was, we launched a database product, or we tried to go into an information business and try to really create a subs model or a membership model. And I think, that for us was a real lesson. I think for me, it was the lesson that, one should lead with the customer first rather than with the business first, right? So, we thought, great, subs business, higher multiples, it's, all of the good things that come with sub businesses, and we were sort of lured by the attraction of what it was. And I think it was sexy at the time, and so we said, right, let's just create that. And from the top, we started developing that. We invested a lot of time and energy and resource trying to develop a sophisticated database tool and product that matched made people digitally. And, lo and behold, that kind of failed. So we kind of learned some lessons from that and I guess evolved further to really hone in on what really is our core strength, which is creating powerful events, live events, really, to connect to the people. Yeah. And that's kind of the journey that we ended up sort of really doubling down on, instead of doing this kind of focused, or this ploy to kind of get an information subs business going. We doubled down on events. We focused on scaling the partnering dimension to what we're doing. We took a less is more approach. So we tried to cut the fluff and really focus on what was working well. And in the core markets that were important to us, then that's kind of the internationalization piece for us. Like in life sciences, there's no bigger market than the US. So we made a deliberate decision to kind of scale and grow in the US. And that's kind of been the journey to where we've ended up, really.
Just, Dan, if I may, just a follow-on question to that. You haven't talked about COVID. And actually, one of the things that struck me when you gave us the privilege of advising on the sale was how well you'd done during COVID, not just in maintaining sponsor and exhibitor type relationships, but in terms of getting money from people to pay for the events and the partnering. And so in a way, it might be counterintuitive that you then doubled down on live events. So, but the business accelerated post-COVID through live, even though you've done well digitally. So what's your perspective on that? Why did you go more live, even though you've done well in digital environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, we did mull this over quite a lot. I think, we had a good pandemic, if you can say that. As you say, we actually retained most of our sponsorship and we eliminated a lot of the venue costs. So our net profit really sort of did, catapulted in that. I guess the decision to go back hard with live events rather than try to really, develop a digital revenue stream or a hybrid. We decided against hybrid, by the way, and that's another story. But I think that was customer led. Like, again, we took our views from the customers that we had, our sponsors and our delegates. And, this is, I think did coincide with an insight project that we did together with you guys as well here. And really what that showed, when we did that sort of deep dive with our customers, is that, the strength of the partnering proposition that we had was in live events. And it also showed that the customers wanted live events. They did not want a digital hybrid solution. So again, we asked the market, and the market gave us a very clear signal that, they wanted live events, and we agreed. We love doing live events, and that decision really did pay off handsomely. I think we're not the only ones who have benefited from that. I think, a lot of the industry has pivoted back to live events in a strong way and reap the rewards from that. But for us, I think it was obviously a key decision that thankfully we got right, and kind of did get us to the position where we are now.
We just touched upon it, Terry. It's fair to say the business diversified quite a bit over the best part of 10 years, both geographically, by sector, by product, by event formats. If there's someone listening to this that is on their journey and they're interested in, they feel like they're missing out on a big segment of their market geographically, or they want to change their event format slightly or their products, what sort of advice would you give them on their journey? Because you might understand there's that pot of gold over there, or actually you've got a feeling that you should do this. But it's obviously not just as simple as sort of turning the ship in one direction. What advice would you give to people listening to this that want to go down the same route?
Advice that I should have given myself a lot earlier, which is shoot the magpie. I think as a kind of I don't know if it's probably common to most entrepreneurs, but I have magpie syndrome, right? Which is I see something shiny, I think it's amazing, and I just go for it. I just want to pick it up and run with it. And then I see another shiny thing and I think, wow, that's amazing. What a great opportunity. Let's go with it. So the advice that I probably should have taken much earlier is shoot the magpie, and really just focus on the one or two things that you are really good at. The one or two things that really set you apart. And then, I guess linked to that is this idea of less is more. It's a very valuable lesson that I learned on my journey, that, the less you focus on, the more you're probably able to achieve, provided you've got the right idea. And then finally, take your cue from the market. Don't take your cue from your own, cocked up business plan. If you sit in a room and come up with an idea on your own, you may think it's great and you want to kind of mold everything into that idea. It doesn't work. You need to kind of get your cues from your customers and from the market.
Sure, thank you. And we touched upon technology just in the last segment. You made the decision to invest in licensing an existing solution rather than building your own proprietary tech in relation to facilitate the one-to-one partnerships, which we discussed, on the partnership model. Can you just explore that a bit more? Actually, I think in the pre-call you did say that you did start down the journey of building your own solution, and then you stopped. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that decision and why that was made.
Yeah, I think in the early days we did have grand visions of developing a technology product and then leveraging that. Again, a couple of things to say about that. It's not our lane. We didn't understand it. We didn't know it. So we had to kind of source external expertise to do that. And that's a pain. B, it's expensive. And, if you don't have the capital resources to kind of do it, which in those days we didn't, we were bootstrapped and, cash strapped. So we decided against it. And see, again, take your cue from the market. There were some very, very good partnering solutions or partnering technologies out there. And, the market was used to using those solutions. So it became in the end quite a simple decision to just end up licensing that technology and going with the flow of what the market was already using. And it simplified things massively for us. We were able to kind of get back our focus, and, it became a reliable. We did experiment with different kinds of partnering technologies out there over the years, and some are better than others. But again, you can tweak and experiment and play with a licensed product much easier than you can build your own, So for us, it did make sense to do it. I think for others, it would be a different decision. Like, if you are generally building something that doesn't exist in the market, and you've actually got something that is unique and different and you're solving a new problem with your tech products, then great. For us, we didn't find that to be the case. Like, there were some very, very exciting and very useful sort of partnering technologies and tools out there that we could sort of leverage. And we took the view that kind of technology was an enabler of what we wanted to do, which was connect the CEOs and the investors and the pharma people. And the solution that we did ended up being much cheaper and solved the problem that we had very elegantly. So that's kind of where we landed on it. I would say now, with the kind of the acquisition by Informa, one of the huge sort of synergies there is their partnering technology. They have an incredibly sophisticated partnering system called Partnering One, which we can now kind of slot into, which would be, hugely beneficial to us. But again, it's nice that, we didn't have to build anything ourselves. We can just...
Sure. It's interesting, though, because obviously the one-to-one partnering became a core part of your business. And from the outside, it could be seen as a potential threat that you don't own the technology that facilitates that. So what was a plan B if, for whatever reason, the solution that you used went off in a different direction, didn't exist anymore? How would you, overnight, continue?
Well, I guess there are different again, the marketplace of partnering technology is varied, right? So there are alternatives. Like if the partnering solution that we were using went bust or decided not to work with us, there were other licensed products that we could use. I would say, look, the IP, the value proposition of what we're doing is not in the partnering technology. It's in what we're able to do behind the time. It's garbage in, garbage out. Right. So like if you what we were able to do is kind of bring the data and just input it into the partnering technology. That's the real value. If you can kind of get the right people and you can get the right kind of data points inputted and then you make the connections, that's the valuable thing. It's not the technology itself. As I said, technology is just enabling what we were doing.
I guess what we're saying is it should serve the value proposition that you're trying to deliver. I think you sort of referenced that. And coming back to the magpie analogy, it's easy. And this is happening now, right? There's been an explosion of technology specifically serving the events industry. And I guess, it's easy to say, oh, that's a shiny new toy over there, or this is a shiny new toy over there. And I'm going to sort of utilize that. And on that point, just generally, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on, how you think organisers should decipher through the noise and decide what tech to use, what, and out of all the different offerings that are out there.
I think it comes back to your customer and your value proposition. Like, you got to really look at what is it you're trying to do for your customer, and what is the best tool that's going to enable that. So if you have a list of criteria of what it is your unique value proposition is and what you're creating value for your customers is, you need to select a tool that can enable that. I wouldn't go shopping for the shiniest possible tool and then retrofit your value proposition into that. I don't think that works. So I think I don't think it's really kind of rocket science. I think it's about, just looking at your proposition, what is the value you're creating for your customers and how can you do that? What are the things that you need to be able to do that? And then selecting a tool that can do that in the best way possible. I would also say, it helps if you work with a provider who is kind of flexible and is, someone. I do think there are good providers and there are bad providers, right? So, and again, I kind of look for evidence of character and past behavior. Best predictors of future behavior is past behavior, I was always told. And so, do your diligence on some provider before you go with them. But in general, that's kind of the approach I take.
Thank you. Piers, did you want to?
Yeah, just to say on that, I think with EventTech, Dan, and it's interesting that we're talking about the tech before the proposition. It just shows that we've all got a bit of magpie syndrome as well. I think one of the big problems in the events industry is software companies that are good at one thing and then add on other stuff to the suite, and they're progressively less good at the other functionality. And it's interesting to me, not interesting, it's logical that Terry and Neil ended up picking a dedicated partnering platform that had been tested in non-events, non-media environments.
Right.
And so it's more annoying to put a stack together quite often. But, I think I've lost track of the number of reg companies that have expanded loads of different things that they do, but also the number of reg companies that have gone bust in my 25 years in events. So I think there's a correlation between those two things.
I do want to talk about the proposition a bit more. You went from local or regional focus to an international presence, and you would agree, most would agree, that's a significant undertaking, especially going into the US. History is littered, not just in the events world, but outside businesses generally, trying to go from the UK into the US and not succeeding. Talk to us about the key challenges you faced during this transition, please, Terry, and how you sought to overcome them.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is I absolutely love doing business in the US. Like it's so different to doing business in the UK. Like, the Americans, they're generally sort of so optimistic. And like, if you're an entrepreneur and you tell them your story, they're just like, hell yeah, let's do it. Whereas a Brit or European is always a bit more circumspect, and so I really did enjoy sort of going out. I mean, we were cowboys. Like, we showed up in America and we said, right, we're going to do this big event, and the Americans' response in general was very positive. There were a number of challenges. Obviously, I think that there are cultural challenges, and you kind of have to adapt your style of play. Some of the challenges we faced in particular was kind of very insular networks and very kind of cliquey kind of things in the life science community. There's kind of very sort of cliquey behavior in particularly in the investor world. But I think, how we tackled it is we developed very strong partnerships with, some of our partners. So in the Nordic region, we partnered with NASDAQ. In the US, we had some very good relationships with some key pharma players and lawyers. And then we leveraged a lot of kind of the investor relationships that we had developed in the UK, and got some key introductions in the US. And then it was very much kind of a domino effect. We went there was a lot of pounding the pavement. So there was a lot of, face-to-face meetings and trips that we went out there to kind of cultivate and develop those relationships. And once you kind of crack through the clique, as I said, they're generally very open, and they'll kind of introduce you. And in the same way, I kind of, we built the sort of media entrepreneur network. It's like, you go for coffee with someone and you have a conversation that say, oh, let me introduce you to X, Y, and Z. And then you go and do the same thing. And that's how we built our network in the US. And we changed our branding as well, which is another story. But I think it was that kind of slow process of, pounding the pavements, one by one network relationships and building. And then, yeah, just having a little bit of audacity, I think, to actually, go and tell them that this is what you're going to do. So, yeah.
Sure. Thank you. I know, Piers, you've got some views on this.
Yeah, just on internationalization, it's just good to put it into an M&A context. We talk a lot to trade buyers, both through structured annual survey and through processes. One thing is having a presence in the US is a really good thing for most buyers on both sides of the Atlantic. In many markets is the market to crack. The second thing is that there's a strategic risk for sellers who are thinking about an exit. They've got a timeline, they've got a profit number they want to get to. And there's a proportion of buyers, it's a fraction, but it's a big fraction, who don't like mono-geo businesses. Because the idea is, okay, you've dominated this market, whether it's the UK or English-speaking Europe, but you haven't proved that you can get outside that. So our acquisition case on geo-adapting or whatever might be flawed. How do we prove that other than through a consultancy project? And so the fact that Terry and Neil did that is really important. The converse is, how much do you invest in internationalizing your operation? So opening an office in Hong Kong, Sydney, if you're American, in London, if you're British, in New York or the West Coast, wherever it might be, can be very, very expensive, very operationally difficult. Very often one of the founders has to be willing to go out there and support that operation. And actually, it can be very helpful to prove the concept from your home base, but then let someone else do the work. Because actually, from the buyer's point of view, there's an obvious benefit. They're going to benefit from that synergy of, we've got boots on the ground. We have sales office there, we have market knowledge, we've already done all the legal stuff. And so you're actually improving the acquisition case for your future buyer. And it means you can have a real conversation about synergies rather than a fake one, which is, we're sure there are loads of synergies. Give me loads of money. I want to go home. I think, Terry, one of the things about your process, you and Neil, was you thought a lot about that legacy. So what's the right home for our business? Who's genuinely going to add value from a market and or geographical point of view? And so I'd just say that thinking about where you sit on that internationalization spectrum is really important.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it did play a huge role in the conversations that we had when we were going through the sale process. The fact that we kind of didn't have boots on the ground in the US, and that was kind of a deliberate strategy on our part. It played really nicely in the conversations because, as you say, there was a very clear point of value or synergy that a potential acquirer could come in. So, yeah, it's a great point.
And it would be worthwhile, Terry, if you don't mind, just touching upon, again, if someone's listening and they've just taken their event, brand, product, service into the States or are thinking about it, just give us a flavour of how you adapted marketing and branding strategies to sort of appeal to a new and wider audience.
I mean, I think, when we launched the company, we launched with the brand Biotech and Money, which we thought was a kind of a Ron Seal name. It's kind of did what it said on the tin. We were connecting biotech with capital and just seemed to make sense. We kind of changed that 3 or 4 years in because it didn't resonate with, I guess, where we were going as a business. We were doing more than just biotech for starters. So we were starting to connect with health tech and medtech and digital health players, as well as kind of your kind of biotech. And we found that actually just having money as the moniker was limiting us. Like we were dealing with C-suite. And so, yes, there were, a clear focus on investment and funding and capital, but we in order for us to kind of grow our sponsorship pools and our delegate revenue, we thought we could appeal to the wider issues or challenges that C-suite people were facing. So that would be looking at things like R&D commercialization strategies or clinical challenges that they may have. Still C-suite level challenges, but even more strategy commercialization focused rather than just kind of the funding finance. So we flipped and changed the brand to Life Science Executives. It's more of a kind of generic LSX name. And that really did kind of open up a lot of avenues for us. I'm not sure whether or not, there was kind of a real distinction between UK and US on that brand flip. Okay. I do think, having the LSX brand certainly helped us in the US, but I think it helped us in the UK as well. I think, yeah. As I say, I'm not sure whether or not that, there are very clear differences in kind of the branding and installation. Certainly in our kind of strategy, we didn't kind of really do that. Maybe Piers can comment on, I don't know if you've seen that elsewhere, where, kind of the branding approach needs to be very different in the US than it does in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, typically in consumer or nationally regulated markets, I mean, the pharma industry is by its nature global. And so, it's not that you wouldn't expect a priori a difference between the two. I think, Dan, what might be interesting here and Terry, is to dig into a bit what the event format is. Because we sort of talked about partnering, you talked about confexes, you talked about strategy.
Sure.
And one of the things that's really exciting for us bringing buyers in to see your business is when they walked around the event, they're like, oh, so that's like a trade show. That's like a partnering meeting. That's like a conference, but it's really well. So just how you designed it, what those layers of value were, including the stuff that was below the radar. I think that might help people to understand why the proposition was so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess there's two sides to the business, right? So we have the LSX side of things, and then we have the RNA events that we do, and they're slightly different in kind of format and strength-wise. And on the LSX side of things, the format of the event is predominantly driven by the partnering dimension of what we do. And so, people sign up 6 weeks before the events, they get on a platform, they then organize meetings, and they send back and forth messages to try to set up meetings so that when they actually arrive at the event, they've got scheduled 30-minute meetings. And if you're a good company, investors will certainly easily get the meetings, but if you're a good company, you should easily be able to get a packed schedule of 30-minute meetings. And I guess, the really sort of valuable thing about this is they are high value meetings and they are high quality. They're extremely time efficient. They're very focused, and you're able to get a significant amount of kind of real business done rather than your kind of informal networking business card exchange that you might get at a traditional environment. So what you'll find at kind of the LSX events is everything really kind of does revolve around the massive partnering space that we have, and people kind of every 30 minutes there's a gong, and then people move on and do their businesses. But I guess one of the differences of what we were able to do versus our competitors is that we had kind of firstly, we had a really strong relationship with the investors. So rather than it just being about biotech meeting pharma, it was biotech meeting investors as well as biotech pharma. But we also had a very strong sort of content component to it. And I think this is kind of what sets us apart. So at the same time as you have, this sort of powerhouse engine of partnering going on, you've got a sophisticated layers of content happening at the same time. So you kind of have panels and keynotes in your traditional sort of convex vein, but then we also do a number of these kind of closed door workshops, and call them CEO forums, which are sort of round tables of 15, 20 people of C-suite people. So there's genuine kind of peer-to-peer exchange and network, which really appeals to kind of the C-suite audience that we have. And I think really it's, we do have, some exhibition at the events on the LSX side, but that's not kind of the primary engine. There's plenty of room for growth on that side of things. But it's that blend, I think, is that sort of chemistry. I think that kind of really works for us on the LSX. On the RNA side, RNA is a more sort of therapeutic event type proposition, which is more leaning on the education and learning dimension. So you'll find a lot of people in the conference rooms for a lot of the conference, and there's less of the kind of hardcore partnering dimension to it. But again, there was an opportunity there for us to carve a place for ourselves as kind of merging, both the scientific and the business of RNA, and that was our positioning with the RNA space, and so now we're starting to see more of the partnering sort of focused at the RNA events as well, and there's a kind of a huge growth opportunity there for the business. So I don't know if that kind of describes, is that what you're after in terms of?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think where you've maybe been a little bit modest, and Dan, I know you've got some questions on the deal itself, is about, you talked about IP before. So the IP is not in the tech. The IP is in the ability to catalyze those relationships and those counterparty transactions. And to do that, you've got the trust of some of the biggest, most important biotech, healthtech, medtech companies in the world. Their CEOs turn up and their CFOs. Crucially, and again, you haven't mentioned this, but the heads of BD and licensing from big pharma from the top 20 are there. So the people who are writing those big checks that transform your customers' lives are there. And what amazed me when I first went around Investorville is you're getting 600 or 700 investors to turn up with a very high show-up rate to meetings, whereas most pharma and biotech events, they're a minority of the audience. So you've just built in that quality core audience, and everything else just serves that. It was really powerful. Anyway, Dan, I get you.
Yeah, I think the investor thing, we led with that when we started the business, right? Again, we started with biotech and money, and we made a deliberate ploy really to become the focal point for the European, when we started, it was European VC investor community in particular in healthcare. And so from the very early days, we kind of had developed a really strong rapport and relationship with that investor community. And I think over the years, we just grew that and it compounded. Again, investors are very cliquey, and if you do well with some of them, they will introduce you to their others, and it did kind of work for us, and as we kind of grew and expanded beyond money, the investors kept coming with it, and as you say, it created a very powerful USP for us. in that we were able to create, partnering events that had extremely high levels of investor turn up on meetings, which is kind of not paralleled in our competitors.
Informa recently acquired the business. I'm interested to know, obviously when you're thinking about selling a business, you've got to keep running the business. How do you prioritize and manage those aspects? So, running the business at the same time as potentially preparing it for a sale.
I think the first thing to do is kind of make sure you're in a position where you are working on the business and not in the business. And I think the sooner you can kind of get yourself to that position, the better. But I do think it's about making sure you have the capacity to do a process like this before sort of really fully committing to it. And you need a lot of capacity. Certainly when we undertook this, it's all consuming. So it was very important that we had carved out time to do it. So I'd say, before even going into the process, just make sure that you are able to clear your calendar for vast swaths of time so that you can properly dedicate to it. And then I would say share the load. Like, we benefited a lot because, there were two of us, Neil and I, and we also had our FD involved in this kind of process. The other thing that we did that may be somewhat controversial is that we brought in early two of the very senior managers that we have in our business who are equity holders into the fray. So we let them know about the process and what was going on. They were kind of instrumental in growing the company, and they were our succession plan, which I think we'll probably talk about later. But
yeah,
I think the kind of, the decision to make sure that you have, firstly, you're working on the business and you can carve out a lot of time to dedicate to it before even sort of embarking on the process is a good one. And then share the load, make sure as much as you possibly can that you can distribute the labor. I would say it really helps if you've got really robust systems and processes in place already before embarking on any sale processes. If you've already got all of your P&L and your kind of your systems organized in a really nice, efficient way, it makes it a lot less painful. If you're already tracking the right KPIs and you're already making sure that you've got your eyes on all of the quality of earning indicators and you can kind of access all of that really quickly and easily, it makes the process a lot easier.
Sure. Piers, thank you, Terry. Piers, I'd like to get your view. Obviously, you have over the years, and I'm sure you continue to do so, obviously work in this environment. Just give us a view as to how business owners, can continue to run a business while preparing a business for exit.
Well, I think, as Terry said, going with your eyes open is really important. I mean, we started really, really early working together, Terry, on the process, didn't we? Because there are so many layers that there's an exactitude around diligence that makes you realise where the leaves of your business really lie. And you guys were already tracking quality of earnings, retention rates. But actually, there's some work we could do around aligning what's happening on the retention rates and the forecasting in the business, and therefore the decisions around resourcing. Seems quite niche and nuanced, but you and Neil had a lot of thoughts around that, and it changed some of the ways that you think about the sales in the business. I think having a good FD is really important. Even if you can't afford a full-time one, get a part-time one. And that person, you need to rely on that person to run at least part of the process, or it will kill you, even if you've got two co-founders. So I agree with Terry on that. I think the other bit is around the interplay between the numbers and the words. So very often, entrepreneurs are great at determining a vision, where we sit in the market, our positioning, and then they're also very good with numbers, like here's our budget, here's what we're going to do. How those two things flow into each other and affect each other, if you get those things lined up, which happens all the time in big companies but not in small companies, you'll be much, much more sale ready. And I think one of the great things is, Terry, you talked about you and Neil, your complementary skills. In any one question, there was always a way that you carved up the tasks, and you also communicate a lot, which you didn't mention because it's so natural to you. But a lot of co-founders don't. They don't have that thing of, right, well, how are we going to nut this thing out, whether it's partnering or sale prep or quality of earnings? And you come back and then you've got a message already for the team and you're aligned on it. So I think that element of trust is really important. I would say this, but generally speaking, make sure you're well advised when you've got a great board or you use people like us, because there's that thing of you need somebody who knows what the buyers are looking for, but also who can absorb a lot of the emotional heat, because it's your life, it's your business, and there are decisions being made in it day by day that you need to keep your eye on. And getting some objectivity in the process is what makes it work. Great thing working with Terry. Sorry, Terry, I was just going to say, you guys are very calm. Like you understand yourselves, you understand your emotions. I can't express how important that is to getting a smooth process. I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump in there, I mean, the importance of getting the right advisors is just so important. And yeah, I've said it to you privately, Piers, but I'll say it publicly. I think you guys did an absolutely amazing job, and also the lawyers, yeah. I think it, again, the question that you asked, Dan, around, how do you balance the demands of, running your product portfolio and events business while doing a sale? I think a key success factor there is in the advisors that you choose and how they conduct the orchestra, so to speak. So I think, pay a lot of attention to your selection. I think is a good thing to think about.
And generally, just sort of final question on this, you might have had a few companies in mind that might have been interested in acquiring the business. I guess it's also important not to let that affect what you choose to do with the products, because I guess it could be quite easy to think, okay, if I just tweak this company might be a bit more interested in what I'm doing, or if I tweak that, and that might never come to fruition, right? That acquisition, and then you sort of set yourself up maybe to adapt in the wrong way. Does that ever come into your mindset? Again, coming back to the magpies, there are magpies of shiny new potential acquirers. How important is it to keep doing what you're doing?
I think, one of the key success factors for us, I think, was having a very clear vision and business plan for the next 3 years. So being able to go to a buyer and the market with, this is our vision, this is our business plan, this is how we're going to do it, this is what it's going to cost, this is where we're strong, this is where we need help. Singular sort of focus and clarity on what that is puts you in a very strong position. So I think, you kind of want to go into this process with, this is how we're going to grow, this is what we're going to do. And then, leave it to the buyer to kind of spot where the opportunities for collaboration or synergies may be. You can highlight where you're weak, right? Like, so we knew that we didn't have boots on the ground in the US and we needed help with that. So, and guaranteed, one of the first questions they always ask you is, what are you lacking? What's missing? How can I help? So I don't think you should be kind of leading with a shape-shifting approach. I think you should be leading with a very clear, this is how we intend to grow the business and what we intend to do with it. Does that resonate?
Sure, Piers? It does. And I think you made some very important decisions 2 or 3 years beforehand that fed into that. I think one reason I was nodding is that what buyers like is a value creation plan, and what you need as an owner is a value creation plan. Now, you and Neil were 2 or 3 years into that, which is why it helped. A big decision you made, and I remember we were sitting in a restaurant in Islington, you're talking about, well, do we get to X profit and try and get a subscription multiple for the whole business? Or do we get to X times 1.5 and get to an events multiple, which is the same enterprise value, doing something that we understand more simply and more quickly? You made the courageous decision to kill the magpie and just go, let's get really good at events. And once you decided that, you then went, well, it's very obvious that our proposition is around partnering. So we need to be much more than an events company. We need to catalyze these partnerships, even if we can't directly monetize this part of it or that part of it. And so when you came to the buyers, you went, we're in these 2 sectors. Here's the one we're established. Here's the one that's exciting and growing, that's new, that's on a similar path product-wise. And our core value prop is not a conference or an exhibition. It is partnering, a real value proposition, not a feature. So you already had a value creation plan and strategy that was in action. And therefore, when you came to sell it, you weren't making up bullshit. Whereas I think other people are not clear on their revenue mix, or they're not clear on what buyers want. And where, Dan, to your question, where the gaming comes in is making that decision far enough out You can aim for a revenue mix that buyers will like, but in service of customers and their value. And I think it's that mixture of understanding what good looks like for buyers, but then being committed to your customers that is the DNA, if I may use a life sciences analogy, of your success. One other point I'd make is around sectors and diversification. You've got a model partnering, it's not a buy-sell partnering, it's an ecosystem partnering counterparties that you could have used in other sectors. That was an option. But actually you stuck to your knitting, you stayed in a reasonably broad niche. And that meant that it probably narrowed your pool of buyers, but it deepened their appetite. So if you look at the 4 strongest bids that you received, they were all companies that understood life sciences. And interestingly, to Dan's point around do buyers go off, the most motivated approach you had before deciding to go to market was from a company that ended up not bidding. So there was something there around getting ready for sale allowed you to align yourselves with the companies that most understood what you wanted, not just the fact they've come to you with a checkbook. And so you had principles and direction. And it's easier for me to say that because I see so many companies getting ready for sale, failing or succeeding. You just were very, very clear about your true north.
Thank you, Terry. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been fascinating listening to the insights around the topics that we've discussed. And we wish you the very best of luck for the future with whatever comes next.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks very much, Dan.